Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do a DIY Dollar Tree Farmhouse heart home sign. But we have to do it in two parts because really it's that long. This first part we're going to make this plaid heart. Now you know my tutorials like to be in depth, right? We're going to redo this Valentine's Day sign. This is a chipboard that says love. We're going to use the white chalk paint. I will link the video on how to make that in the description box down below. We're also going to need some black paint. You can get the Crayola Craft paint from the Dollar Tree I got, or you could use just apple barrel. We're just going to use a piece of popsicle stick as well as a piece of foam brush to make a rubber stamp. Not a rubber stamp, because it's going to make foam, a foam stamp. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyhow, when I was editing this video in its two parts, I did realize that this part goes kind of fast, but the other part is just going to take too long for me to put it into one video. So I apologize about that ahead of time. But one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to peel this paper off of the back. Now, normally we could just paint on the back and that's fine, but this is very brightly glittered. And where I wanted to hang it, I knew that you would be able to see it because it was going to be on the back, like on a glass door. So you'd be able to see in the back. It was going to be all this shiny, glittery love, and I wasn't really into that. So basically, if you've never worked with one of these before, there is a hard piece of like chipboard, which is really like a high density fiberboard that it's actually made out of, which is a little bit more weather resistant than the cardboard that it's overlaid with. So this is just sort of like a really thin piece of cardboard, almost like poster board, that they glue on top of that chipboard. And we're just going to peel this away. We're not going to take the time. I have lots of videos on how different ways to remove this. Actually, not different ways, just many times I've removed it using water and scraping tools and everything. But I'm not even going to worry about all of the cardboard that's left behind because it is very neutral looking. All I'm going to do is really peel off the layer that has the glitter. Okay? And it just takes a few minutes, honestly. And I think that it's well worth it. If you notice the bottom corner of this, mine was actually chipped, so I had a really good starting off point. But that was another reason why I wanted to go ahead and take the glittery back off. But if yours is in good condition and you don't mind leaving it back there, you can just skip this step 100%. Now, we have done different DIYs on how to make the black and white buffalo check. This one is just going to be a tiny variation on that. What we're going to do first is we're going to paint the entire back of this with the white chalk paint. But like I said, I'll link the video of how to create the chalk paint in the description box down below. It is super cheap and inexpensive, and it really does have that really great chalk look and feel. Okay, so we're just going to do is, if you've never worked with this chalk paint that we've made, it does dry so quickly that there is no editing in this process. You almost see me put the second coat on and the third coat on right on top of the first coats. It just dries so quickly that we can go ahead and keep adding the coats that we like on there. Okay, so every time I go to use it, I shake it up. I check its consistency to make sure it still has enough water. If yours dries out, unlike just regular acrylic paint, you can reconstitute it really well by adding just a tablespoon of water at a time. And then mix it up and make sure that you have the consistency that you want of this chalk paint, which is really great. And obviously they sell chalk paint. It's just a little pricey for my taste. But they sell it at Walmart, at Michael's and Joann's, and all the craft places, okay? So you could use that as well. And you could also just do this with regular acrylic paint. We're just going to do something a little bit different this time by using the chalk paint as a basis, okay? Now I like to go around the edges, and I do this at the beginning as well as the end because we're going to add like a very, very faint white edge around here when we're done. Almost look like it was sanded, but we're going to do that at the very end again, you'll see. And here I am, it's like first coat's done, but look, I've got all these places left over, so I just keep adding the paint until I get the look that I want, the coverage that I want, and the consistency that I want. Not the consistency, the appearance that I want. Yeah, sure. This, like I said, was just 3 quick coats. Technically, it's probably just 1 heavy duty coat, but it did go like 3 quick coats. And the fact that I'm going in the direction of the heart isn't necessary, but because we're going to stamp over it. But yeah, it's just me. That's just the way I am. I wanted this. The reason I'm using chalk paint for this particular DIY is because I wanted the feel of to be fabric. The stamp that we're going to use is going to look very modeled. It's going to make it look like a little variegated as well, so that it won't really take on the look of like, it's either going to look like it's really antique painted or it's going to look like it's fabric. That was my goal anyway. All right. So once you have the coverage that you want to go ahead and you want to set this aside and take this opportunity to wash your brush. Always clean up after yourself, guys, because it's another way to save money when you're crafting, is just take a few minutes with a little dish soap to clean your brushes while they're fresh and wet, okay? And if you can't get to them, stick them in a little Ziploc bag or wrap them in a little plastic wrap, and they'll stay moist until you can get to washing them, all right? Even though that they're inexpensive brushes, you still want to take care of them because you won't have to keep buying them. So now we're going to make a stamp, and we made a stamp back in the autumn. If you've been around for a while, you know what I'm talking about. But we made that one out of the building Jenga blocks. We made it a little bit bigger. So what I liked about is these craft sticks. This is actually a used craft stick, the one I stirred the paint with, are 1.5 inches wide. So I knew that if I made, I'm sorry, there's 3/4 of an inch wide. So I knew if I took 2 of them, it would be 1.5 inches wide. So what I did was, that's the size of the stamp that I wanted. So I cut them each 1.5 inches long. When I glued them together, then they will make a 1.5 inch square. All right, and now I'm just taking the little remnants of the parts that I cut off, and I'm using them in the opposite direction to stabilize the two pieces together. And I'm just using my hot glue for that, but you can use craft glue if you have the patience to let it dry. Yeah, I'm just taking pieces that are broken off as well, and I'm just gluing it just to give it a little extra support. And now we're going to take the foam off of a foam brush. What I'm doing here is I'm just sanding where it wasn't a perfect rectangle, a perfect square. I'm just using this nail file as a piece of sandpaper, just because I had it here, and that's what I do sometimes. So I'm just trying to make it as square as possible, squaring up the sides. Every time, once in a while, when you cut it, it doesn't cut quite straight. So as long as I'm left over with a 1.5 inch square, that's what I want. So now I'm just ripping the foam part off of a foam brush, and as long as it's big enough to be 1.5 inches square, then I've cut it in, basically it's 2 pieces of foam sandwiched together with the insert in it. What I've done is I've cut them in half, and I've done that a little different than the one we did last time. Last time we left the 2 layers and we glued them together, but this time I went ahead and I just used the 1 layer, and just kept cutting it, measuring it, and cutting it till it was a 1.5 inch square. If your little wood pieces turn out to be a perfect 1.5 inch square, you can glue it on there and then use that to cut it off. Mine wasn't quite, so I wanted to make sure I cut my foam separately, okay? And does it have to be perfect? No, just close to square as possible. As long as you don't turn the sponge when you're stamping, it won't make too much of a difference if it's not quite exactly square. It's just to give you that appearance. And you know, when it is fabric, fabric pulls in different directions anyway, so imperfections sometimes add to the perfection of what you're trying to do, okay? So now just keep trimming, and then when I'm done trimming it, we're just going to put a good quick layer of hot glue down on the wooden pieces and glue that square right onto the 2 pieces of popsicle stick that we have laying over there. And then we have created our stamp. Now, just like in our previous videos that we have done for buffalo check, we're going to go ahead and we're going to mix a gray that we want somewhere between our black and white. Again, the gray being whatever you're interested in. Some people like it really, really muted gray. Some people actually like this dark gray that I've actually mixed to be there in place of their black, and they'll just do a gray and white buffalo check because that's the look that they're going for. But once I have the stamp and I have my gray mixed, I'm just using the ruler to measure 1.5 inches away. I'm basically putting the stamp at say the 16 mark. Well, let me start with 1. Say I was putting it at the 1 mark, it will stamp to 2.5, and then I'm going to skip to the 4 mark, and it's going to stamp to 5.5. Then I'm going to skip to the 7 mark, and so on and so forth. And once you have that first row down, you can just go ahead and build off of it. It's really just that simple. You connect all the dots. Now you see, as I'm doing this, the board that we've painted is bowed, and it was bowed before I started painting it, because it just came out of the store that way. I guess it was the way it was packaged in the store. But what I'm doing is I'm taking the paint that I had mixed in the cover of this mason jar cover, and I'm taking some of it and dabbing some off onto the paint tray there, and then going to the artwork. The plan that I have for this is to cover the center, but I still wanted to show you guys how to make it look very, I don't know, sort of primitive looking, old school crafting, I guess is what I want to say, where it's not really so perfect. Okay, so I am having corners, especially on that first block. The corners are coming out a little bit fatter. For some reason, I was pressing a little hard on the corners, but that's just my own hand. Everybody's will come out probably a little different. So keep that in mind. So once I have all of the gray stamped in, have the whole thing covered, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the actual still square. I'm just going to tilt it up and use one edge to fill in the squares. So basically what I'm doing is I'm putting the stamp back on top of the square that I stamped, tilting the back up, and almost using it like a paint pad. As you can see there, I'm just dragging it across to get more coverage. You see that? There we go. And then if you have to turn the heart to get even edges, you can, because that's what we're going to do when we go ahead and paint the other colors. And this is just an option, you know, if you have more paint and you want to stamp harder the first time. This is just going to give us that very free. I feel like when the squares have darker edges than their center, for some reason that just reminds me of more of a vintage buffalo check. I don't know why. I wish I could tell you exactly the inspiration of why it feels that way. I feel like more like Mary Angle Bright, maybe, like, I'm not really sure if that's where I'm getting the feeling from, but that's just what my mind was thinking. Okay? So when you go ahead and you finish up with all of your gray, so we've done DIYs on buffalo check before. Basically, you want to make a gray and white checkerboard, and then you're going to fill in every other row with to make them gray and black. Okay, so every other row is going to be gray and black, and then every row, well, opposing rows, one will be gray and black, one will be gray and white, one will be gray and black. But you'll see, we'll show you here that in a second. It really is really quite simple. And yes, that little tiny corner in the upper right hand corner needs a little tiny gray, but we'll get to that at the end. It didn't quite make it to the edge. Now, the way I did this and the way that I wanted to do this is I actually have a it's like almost like a negative mirror image where the outside of one whole side of the heart will be white squares and the opposite will be gray squares on the opposite side. Actually, it's going to be black and white on one side and black and gray on the other side. But I did that on purpose is what I'm trying to say. If you want more of a symmetrical look, you want your center to be a row of squares. Instead, what I have is the seam sort of going down the center. Does that make sense? Hopefully you guys understand what I'm trying to say there. Okay? And now I've taken a foam brush. This is a very narrow foam brush that in the set that I got from the Dollar Tree. I found them in the Workforce. They're by Workforce in the tool section. And I've taken the really, really thin one, and I'm just using black paint. And what I'm just doing is I'm filling in the rows. Either, columns go up and down, rows go left and right. So you want to make sure that you do, if it's a black in the column and it's a black across the rows, then there'll be the whites will be the opposing colors. All right? I hope this is all making sense the way I explain it. Sometimes it makes total sense in my head, and then when the words come out, they don't really make sense. So I'm sorry if that is the case. But hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. Now I'm using the edge of the foam brush to get as straight a line as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't want it to be perfect. Obviously, if you wanted it to be perfect, there are lots of ways to get perfect buffalo check. You could tape off. We drew lines. We did finer paintbrushes. There's all different ways, but this particular look is not supposed to be that. Okay. We will touch up what's like really out of control, but we really wanted this hand painted haphazard look on this. Okay. And when you see the second piece, that's supposed to look like reclaimed wood, then you'll see why I like the way that they looked handmade together. All right. So as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm using the edge of the brush to keep square, and then I'm turning it so that I can get the edge on both sides of the square. Basically, I'm painting the edge going towards the middle, then turning it around and painting the opposing edge and going back towards the middle. And I'm going to do this for all of the black ones in that row. Okay. Now, if you wanted to just use this the way it was, if you wanted to, there's lots of different ways. When we made the buffalo check pumpkin, we were able to put words on it just using some craft paper, just to give some differentiation between the words and the buffalo check. Because sometimes it's hard to read direct when something's directly on buffalo check unless it's lighter. And then in the autumn time, we did the same thing where we used craft paper behind the word just to give that little bit of a distinction, this distinction between the words and the buffalo check. But for this one, we're actually going to put a whole board on top of it. But if you were going to go ahead and write on this, obviously you could stop at just the buffalo check and you can go ahead and make this your whole project if you wanted to. But we're going to add the second layer with the wood heart coming tomorrow. Okay, so stay tuned for that. All right. And then once we have all of the black rows and columns done, then we're going to touch back up with the white. This is the same paintbrush that I washed and dried. And then I'm just using it to make all of those really, really thick corners go away. And then any overage, any splash over or squeeze over or rub off that I had, I'm going to go ahead and touch them up. The same way we did with the black. We're going to use the edge of the paintbrush to our advantage. Okay? And we can just fill in all the corners and squares. All right. Now there's a couple of different ways to distress this. You definitely could distress this with sandpaper, but here's the thing. I wanted to distress it with the white paint because if I would have distressed it with the sandpaper, it would have turned natural color. It would have revealed the color of the chipboard as opposed to white. And I really wanted this to look like it was a white heart under there. So now I've just taken the foam brush with some paint on it, not a lot, but just enough. And I've just run it across all of the edges. So you can see there, the effect is very subtle, but it does look like it is basically fabric glued down on the top of a white heart. And that's it for part 1. Here's what it looks like when it's all finished tomorrow. So stay tuned for tomorrow for part 2. And if you have any questions about this portion, please leave them in the comments down below. And as always, you take care, God bless, and we'll see you next time. Bye!